So we live in a time where moral, social, and political issues are almost never simple. Think about topics like climate change, migration, identity, Israel, Gaza, that I called before. These issues touch on deeply held values and emotions, and everyone sees them differently. And yet, public debate is often framed in black and white terms, like us versus them, right or wrong. Like there's just one way you could see this right, and everyone else is wrong. People try to reduce it to something simple. Like you see with Gaza, people saying it's just genocide, we need to stop. It's that simple. And regarding like migrants, you see a group saying like we should just send them back. End of story. And this shows how hard it is for many of us to deal with complexity. But what do we mean with handling complexity? Well, it means being able to hold multiple perspectives, values, and truths at the same time without becoming confused, overly relativistic, or resorting to oversimplification. It's a difference between healthy doubt and paralyzing doubt, between nuance and vagueness. So, concretely, it means things like this: recognizing conflicting values without immediately choosing one at the expense of the other. And many public debates involve a clash between two values that are both legitimate. Like think about religious freedom versus equal treatment. Like we want to respect religious traditions, but also stand up for equal rights, for example, around gender and sexuality. Or sustainability versus economic security. Like climate policy is necessary, but it also affects people economically. And people who cannot sit with that tension often rush to take sides morally without truly engaging with that complexity. But it is crucial to let those conflicting values coexist for a moment. Handling complexity also means listening to uncomfortable perspectives and also take them seriously. Take the feminist debate, where there's rightful attention to inequality and violence against women, but at the same time, more and more men don't feel valued in society. They say they struggle with like loneliness and mental health. And to some feminists, this may feel that the conversation is being hijacked. But still, those other voices also matter. And not to undermine feminist concerns, but to broaden the conversation. What do both men and women need in order to live well? What it also means to handle complexity is tolerating tension and uncertainty without falling back on your group or moral certainties. Again, to that feminist, like let's say you're identifying strongly with feminism, and then you hear men talk about the lack of support or meaning they have in their lives. That may clash with the dominant narrative that men are mostly privileged. The reflex might be like, come on, like men already have enough privilege and advantages. But if you can let that tension exist for a moment, you might say both can be true. Men can also be a vulnerable group in society. And even my group may have some blind spots. And it takes something to stay open, especially when it feels uncomfortable. So, why is it important to cultivate this ability to handle complexity in public debate? Well, here I can give you 5 reasons. The first one is because social issues are inherently complex. Topics like climate change, migration, war, or inequality, those affect many people. And all those people, they think very differently. They have different interests and different values. And without recognizing this layered reality, we make poor decisions, sometimes deeply unjust ones. Black and white thinking, like thinking in oppressor versus oppressed, makes us blind to the real tension between groups. Second reason, because oversimplification leads to polarization and moralization. We often crave fast and clear cut answers. But that fuels tribalism, like the right versus wrong, us versus them thinking. And this becomes painfully clear in conflicts like Israel or Gaza. Anyone trying to introduce nuance is quickly suspected. Are you anti Semitic, or are you now justifying genocide? And it makes the conversation toxic and unsafe. And when people feel morally judged or shut out, it backfires. They retreat, get angrier, more radical, and we've seen this in movements like Trumpism in the US or the rise of the AfD in Germany. Many people feel in those groups, they feel unseen, unheard, and they end up turning their backs on the system entirely. And then the third reason is because democracy thrives on difference and dialogue. A healthy democracy depends on the ability to tolerate difference, different perspectives, different values, different interests. And we live in a shared society with widely diverse worldviews and needs. And when we're willing to listen across those differences and stay open to one another, we keep the public space free, open, and inclusive. And without that, certain voices get just shut out. And that's a threat to democracy itself. And then the fourth reason is because human experience is complex by nature. We're not simple creatures. We have layers, contradictions, difficult life experiences. And when public discourse only allows for simple narratives or catchy slogans, we exclude much of that rich, messy human reality. And that doesn't just make the debate less honest, it makes it also less human. And then the last reason is because it keeps us from becoming morally self righteous. If you only ever compare yourself to the good group or the correct opinion, there's a risk of feeling morally superior. But those who can tolerate complexity and also stay self critical, they see that moral purity is rarely simple. And even within progressive movements, things can quickly go wrong. Take parts of the LGBTQ plus movement, but also radical feminists, climate activism, or also the pro-Palestinian groups. All of them promote valuable ideas like equality, inclusion, and empathy. But when those ideals harden into moral absolutism, leaving no room for doubt or dissent, openness gets lost. And then we get the opposite of what we're aiming for. People no longer dare to speak up, they feel judged, silenced, cancelled, or ashamed. And they just leave the conversation. And what we then end up with isn't pluralism, it's just a new form of orthodoxy. And that's exactly what we're trying to avoid. So, in short, the ability to handle complexity isn't just a useful skill, it's a fundamental condition for healthy public discourse. Without it, we oversimplify serious problems or exclude people and either paralyze or polarize the conversation. At the same time, it's not something that comes naturally. It takes empathy, practice, and a certain level of psychological development. And that's what I want to explore now. Why are some people better at dealing with complexity than others? And what does developmental psychology say about that? So, we've now spent quite some time on why it is important to be able to handle complexity in the public debate. But then the question remains, how do we actually learn that? Like, is it something that you can learn at school? Or is it about intelligence? Or is there something deeper involved? Developmental psychologists, they have interesting ideas about this. They show that people develop not only physically or cognitively, but also morally and relationally. So the last one is how you see yourself in relation to others, but also how do you deal with conflict and how you learn to handle things that aren't black and white, but that are layered. So what if us versus them thinking, the need for clear-cut positions, or the inability to nuance isn't simply due to stupidity or unwillingness, but just part of a certain developmental stage? And more importantly, what if you can grow out of it? Just like you can learn to walk or to do math, you can also learn to handle moral complexity.